The sky above Salarath cracked open with violent force. The once proud capital of the Harathi species, a jewel of crystalline spires and shimmering towers, now burned like a city abandoned by the heavens. A beam of white-hot energy, laser-sharp and unyielding, tore through the northern district. Buildings that had once risen like the pillars of an ancient dream crumbled instantly, torn apart by the impossible force. Beneath the devastation, the ground shook violently, splintering like the very bones of the city. Windows shattered in every direction, sending jagged fragments of glass cutting through the air like daggers. The distant hum of the protective dome above faltered, flickering briefly before collapsing into a final, gut-wrenching failure. The outer ring shattered first, then the central core, until nothing was left but a deathly silence that followed the destruction. "Evacuate the civilians!" shouted General Jack, his voice cutting through the roar of explosions. His words were swallowed by the growing chaos. In the streets below, panic surged. Hyraian families, their tall, narrow bodies barely visible in the sea of frantically moving citizens, scrambled for shelter. The terror in their eyes was as palpable as the stench of smoke in the air. A child's cry pierced the din. His father, blood streaming from a wound in his side, pressed him into his arms, but the man's strength was failing. Behind them, the ground split open beneath the marketplace, swallowing trams and stalls whole. The city was dying, and there was nothing left to stop it. Inside the shattered defense spire, Counselor Derek Malson gripped the holographic map, his eyes fixed on the now blank spaces where once vital defenses had stood. His brow furrowed as he scanned the last reports, now coming in sporadically, unable to keep up with the destruction. His fingers trembled over the display, but his voice remained steady. "Report," he demanded. The officer beside him, young and pale with fear, hesitated before responding. "We've lost everything, Counselor. All shield arrays are down. The last remaining defense satellites are out. They've already breached the southern bunkers." Malson clenched his fists. "How long?" The officer met his gaze, sweat beading on his forehead. "Less than 2 hours until the final defenses fall. We're already gone." The walls of the command center felt like they were closing in. Malson's eyes flicked to the council table. The elder generals, scholars, and religious leaders sat in stunned silence. No one knew what to say. The weight of the decision they were about to make hung heavily in the air. General Therum, his uniform still singed from the early bombardment, pushed back from the table. "This is it. It's over. We don't have time for miracles." But Malson didn't move. He remained calm, his mind already racing through options that didn't exist. His eyes locked onto the one man in the room who would understand. Elder Koval, a scholar of ancient prophecies. "We're not completely without recourse," Malson said, his voice low but steady. "There's one option left." Koval's eyes darkened. "You don't mean—" He trailed off, the implication clear. Malson nodded. "We have no choice. The obelisk. It's the only thing left." Koval shook his head. "That device is ancient. It's a myth." "It was never a myth," Malson countered, his gaze unwavering. "We've ignored it for too long, hoping for a solution that would never come. The prophecy is real, and it's our last chance." The room fell silent. The prophecy had always been something of legend, a story told to children to explain the lost warborn. But now, in the face of extinction, it felt like the only hope. The elders exchanged uneasy glances. General Jack leaned forward, his voice low. "We don't even know what it does." "We never have," Malson admitted, "but it was meant for moments like this, when all is lost, when freedom is dead." Koval swallowed hard. "But if it doesn't work—" "We won't have to worry about that," Malson replied. "Let's go. There's no time left." As the council descended into the ancient catacombs beneath the city, the air grew heavy with dust, the scent of decay lingering in the chambers. The path leading to the obelisk was narrow, winding through forgotten halls. The walls were lined with worn carvings, ancient star charts and depictions of battles fought long before their time. Torches flickered to life as they passed, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch on forever. At the center of the chamber stood the obelisk, its black surface absorbing the light around it. It pulsed faintly, almost imperceptibly, as though it were alive, waiting for them. 3 concentric rings lay embedded in the floor, their engravings ancient and unreadable by modern eyes. "Is this it?" General Jack asked, his voice barely a whisper. "This is it," Malson replied. He approached the obelisk, his hand reaching out slowly, as if touching something sacred. "The prophecy says we must activate it when freedom is dead." He pressed his palm against the first ring. A low hum vibrated through the ground beneath them. The ring turned, the grooves lighting up with a soft amber glow. Koval stepped forward, his hands shaking as he pressed the second ring. This one moved with a slow, deliberate grind, resistance pressing back before it finally gave way. The final ring awaited. Malson turned to General Jack. "We do this together." Jack nodded grimly and placed his hand firmly on the innermost ring. As soon as his palm made contact, the air in the room seemed to still. The ground trembled as the rings shifted, and a crackling pulse of energy surged up through the obelisk, sending a wave of light spiraling upward, passing through the ceiling and out into the heavens above. In the distance, the coalition fleet, observing from orbit, registered the surge. Their analysts flagged it as a strange energy burst, dismissing it as irrelevant. But they had no idea what had just been awakened. The room grew heavier as Malson turned to face the council once more. The elder faces around him remained frozen in disbelief, their eyes clouded with doubt. The weight of history and uncertainty hung in the air, thickening with every passing moment. They had heard the prophecy. They had lived in its shadow for centuries, but now, at this precipice, it felt like a distant, fading dream. The obelisk, the only weapon they had left, stood in the center of the chamber, its dark, imposing form casting a long shadow across the stone walls. Elder Koval shifted uneasily in his seat. "You can't be serious, Malson. We have no idea what this device will do. The stories say it was never meant to be used. But the stories also say it was meant to be activated when all hope was lost, when freedom was dead," Malson replied, his voice unwavering. He moved closer to the obelisk, reaching out, fingers brushing against the cold surface. "We've come to that moment. We have no other choice." Koval's gaze narrowed. "And if it fails? What then? What if this prophecy was just a cruel legend? What if we're giving up everything for nothing?" Another elder, General Jack, slammed his fist against the table. "We have no time for myths. The coalition is at our doorstep, and we're on the verge of extinction. There's nothing left to lose." The silence that followed was thick, oppressive. The council members exchanged glances, their expressions torn between skepticism and desperation. Malson stood tall, looking each of them in the eye. "This device was left behind for moments like these. It may not be the salvation we want, but it's the only hope we have." Elder Reth, an ancient and reluctant scholar, let out a long sigh, his voice shaking with a mixture of fear and resolve. "If we do this, if we activate it, we are committing ourselves to a path with no return." Malson nodded. "We have no other choice. The coalition will destroy us if we do nothing." Reluctantly, the council stood and moved towards the obelisk. The weight of their decision was palpable as they circled the ancient device. Elder Koval, still hesitant, moved forward, placing his hand on the first ring. The groan of ancient metal echoed through the chamber as the ring slowly turned, a faint amber glow flickering to life. "This is madness," Koval muttered under his breath, his fingers trembling as he withdrew his hand. But Malson didn't flinch. "It's the only chance we have left." He turned to General Jack, who stood in silence, his face unreadable. "We'll finish this together," Malson said quietly. With a firm nod, Jack moved forward, placing his hand on the second ring. This time, the obelisk responded with a low, grinding hum. The second ring rotated with resistance before giving way, the red light flashing brighter as it aligned with the first. The final ring awaited, its surface cold and lifeless. Malson stood before it. He didn't need to look back at the others. He knew what was at stake. They all did. With a slow, deliberate motion, his hand came to rest on the third ring. The moment his palm touched the surface, the entire chamber seemed to hold its breath. The air grew heavy, the space around them vibrating with an intensity that had never been felt before. A loud crack split the air as the final ring shifted. The obelisk shuddered, then hummed to life, its dark surface glowing with a bright, steady light. The walls of the chamber trembled as the pulse of energy surged up from the base of the obelisk, shooting up through the ceiling, up into the heavens above. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the signal burst forth. In the command center aboard the Coalition flagship, Admiral Vortalum stood before the tactical display, his gaze fixed on the planet Varn below. He had watched the destruction unfold, his mind calculating the inevitable end of the Harathi resistance. His confidence was unwavering. The Coalition had fought wars on far more dangerous fronts. This was a routine cleanup. "Admiral, we're picking up a strange signal," reported Lieutenant Cale Voss, the young technician from Ilari, his voice tight with confusion. "It's a high-energy burst, untraceable frequency." Vortalum turned, raising an eyebrow. "Another superstition from the primitives?" "No, sir," Voss replied, his hands flying across the terminal. "This is something different. It's coming from the surface, an unregistered burst of energy." Vortalum's lips curled into a dismissive smirk. "I'm not concerned with dead planets and their dying myths. Continue the bombardment." But as the technician continued his analysis, the signal grew stronger. A ripple in the frequency seemed to stretch across their systems, and for a brief moment, every display flickered. "It's not possible," Voss muttered, trying to make sense of the data. "The patterns, it's not natural. This is—" "Shut it down," Vortalum snapped, cutting him off. He turned his attention back to the battle. "No more distractions. We finish this today." But the data kept coming, more persistent now. It was as if the very fabric of space had shifted. A ripple felt across their systems, threading its way through the galaxy. And far, far above, the human fleet stirred. Back on Salarath, the Harathi watched, breath held, as the obelisk's hum began to fade. The signal had been sent, but what had it done? Was it enough? Counselor Malson stood before the device, a mixture of hope and dread pulling at his chest. He felt the shift in the air, but he couldn't see what had happened. Not yet. He turned to General Jack, who stood silently by the chamber entrance, staring out at the fading light. "They'll come," Jack said, though his voice was far from certain. "They have to." But deep inside, Malson knew the answer wasn't as clear as that. There was nothing left to rely on but their faith in the obelisk. Nothing but the hope that, somehow, they had made the right choice. The signal continued to ripple through space, its presence undeniable. But still, no one understood its true nature. Not yet. Admiral Vortalum stood before the tactical display, the faint light of the galaxy flickering through the viewports as his ship cut through the vastness of space. The hum of the flagship Atanax reverberated through the walls, and his fingers hovered over the controls, watching the diminishing flames of Salarath on the screens. Victory was imminent. Another world subdued, another enemy crushed beneath the heel of the Coalition. The thought left a bitter taste in his mouth, but there was no denying the satisfaction that accompanied it. His fingers danced over the holographic controls, making final adjustments to the fleet's movements. The Harathi had been reduced to nothing more than a stubborn ember in a dying fire. The great city, once a symbol of the Harathi's achievements, was now a pile of smoldering ruins, a testament to the overwhelming might of the Coalition. Vortalum's eyes flicked to the display again, watching as the readouts confirmed what he already knew. Salarath was finished. He leaned back in his chair, the smooth surface cool against his spine. His mind wandered, drifting toward his next conquest, calculating the pieces of his grand campaign. The Harathi had been a nuisance. He could feel it in his bones. This wasn't the real war. The true challenge lay ahead. After Salarath's fall, the Coalition would be unchallenged. There was no force left that could oppose them. Not the Harathi, not the Zorani, not anyone. As the hours passed, Vortalum grew increasingly impatient. His crew worked tirelessly, their eyes flicking between screens, fingers typing frantically across the controls. But he could sense their unease. The pulse of the signal emanating from Salarath's destruction continued to spike on the radar. The strange energy burst, the one that had been detected just before the final bombardment, was still being analyzed by his scientists. But in his mind, it was nothing but a fluke, a glitch in the data, an anomaly that meant nothing. Vortalum didn't bother with it. It was of no concern. Admiral, a voice cut through the air. It was Lieutenant Voss, his insectoid features twitching nervously. The signal from the obelisk is becoming stronger. We can't pinpoint its origin. Vortalem's lips curled into a thin, dismissive smile. It's nothing, just a last gasp from the primitive species below. He glanced at the lieutenant. You're wasting your time on a superstition. Voss hesitated, his gaze lingering on the laser plasma displays. But Admiral, the readings... Enough! Vortalem's voice was sharp. Focus on what's important. The Harathi are finished. We'll move to secure the rest of their systems. I don't have time to entertain ghost stories. But even as he spoke, a strange unease began to crawl at the edges of his mind. The thought felt foreign to him, yet persistent. He quickly brushed it aside. The coalition was powerful. His fleet was the strongest in the galaxy. There was nothing, no threat, no signal, that could challenge them. He turned back to the display, eyes scanning the operational zones. A quiet chuckle escaped his lips. His mind was already racing ahead, plotting the next moves. Nothing would stop them. Certainly not the Harathi. Certainly not this signal. The momentary flicker of doubt vanished. Far below, on the shattered planet of Salarath, the Harathi were struggling to keep the last remnants of their civilization from crumbling. The devastation was unimaginable, but it wasn't just the ruins that weighed on them. It was the awareness that they had no real power left, no tools left to fight back, and no way to stop what was coming. Counselor Derek Malson stood with his hands clasped behind his back, staring out over the ravaged city from a high balcony. His heart pounded in his chest, but his mind remained cool. They had activated the obelisk, a mysterious, ancient device left by the lost warborn, the humans. The prophecy had said it would only awaken when freedom was dead, when there was nothing left. Well, they had reached that point. They had done everything they could. But was it enough? He could feel the weight of the decision pressing on his shoulders. The council was torn, each elder more reluctant than the last. Some doubted the power of the obelisk, others feared its consequences. But there was no choice. If it had even the smallest chance of saving them, they had to activate it. And so, they had. But now as he stood there, watching the endless storm of destruction on his homeworld, Malson couldn't shake the feeling that they had set something into motion that they couldn't control. He had no way of knowing what had happened when the signal had been sent. No way of knowing who or what had received it. All he had were the legends, the myths about the humans, those lost ancient beings who had vanished long ago. Were they really the ones who would answer the call? Or was it all just a cruel illusion? Malson glanced down at the laser plasma display embedded in the balcony railing. It flickered to life, showing the tactical situation of their forces. But it was pointless. The coalition's fleet had already torn through their defenses. Now it was just a matter of when they would finish the job. Then, just as the thought crossed his mind, a pulse rippled across the display. A strange pattern, something that shouldn't be there. A signal, faint but unmistakable. Malson's breath caught in his throat. For the briefest moment, it almost looked like a ship. No, not a ship. An entire fleet. A fleet that wasn't supposed to exist. The human fleet. His heart skipped a beat. The signal faded as quickly as it had appeared, but the implications were clear. Someone had answered. He turned sharply, his heart hammering. Prepare for a new tactical analysis. Now, he commanded. His voice was low, but there was a sense of urgency in it that none of his officers had ever heard before. Tell the council, the humans may have returned. In the far reaches of the galaxy, the coalition fleet remained unaware of what had just been set into motion. Admiral Vortalem leaned back in his chair, his fingers lazily dancing across the console. The enemy was all but defeated. They were done. It was only a matter of time now. He ignored the strange signal, ignored the warning signs that were beginning to mount. They were nothing. A last flicker of desperation from a dying species. There was no threat left. Not from the Harathi, not from anyone. He was too absorbed in his own confidence to see what was coming. The stillness was broken by the unmistakable flare of an alarm, followed by a sharp, chilling hiss that pierced the quiet on the bridge of the Atanax. Vortalem straightened instantly, his eyes snapping to the tactical display, which flickered with irregular bursts of data. His fingers hovered over the controls, calling up the latest feed. A ripple stretched across the vast emptiness of space, distorting the stars. For a split second, it felt like an illusion, a glitch in the system, a malfunction. But no, this was different. The digital readout suddenly exploded with activity, and the calm that had settled over the bridge vanished as rapidly as it had come. "Admiral, you need to see this," came the voice of Lieutenant Voss, who had his gaze locked on the viewport, his antenna twitching with tension. Vortalem didn't waste a moment. He stormed over to the display, the weight of his boots echoing against the cold metal floor, the moment feeling heavier with each step. What he saw there could not be real. A formation. Perfect, precise. No sublight distortion, no irregularities. Just ships, hundreds of them, appearing out of nowhere. A strange, untraceable anomaly in space that only confirmed one thing. Humanity had returned. The screen showed a fleet of sleek, angular ships that seemed to emerge from the fabric of space itself, gliding into formation with a mechanical beauty that was beyond anything the Coalition had ever seen. They were neither large nor small, but something about them felt wrong, too still, too deliberate. "What is this?" Vortalem muttered, his voice tightening with disbelief. His fleet had wiped out the Harathi, and now at the height of victory, this was the surprise. One by one, the ships appeared, filling the screens, their shapes seemingly shifting, conforming to the space around them as though they belonged there. There was no flare, no energy discharge, just the cold precision of their movements. A dead silence fell over the bridge. Even the hum of the Atanax seemed to pause. The crew stood motionless, unable to comprehend what they were witnessing. Their sensors didn't register any standard readings. There was no trace of hyperdrive or FTL signatures, just presence, unyielding and unnerving. "They must be, what, cloaked?" Voss stammered, but his words were weak. It was a defense mechanism, an attempt to hold on to reason. "No!" Vortalem snapped, his face tightening with frustration. "Impossible. They would have appeared earlier. This is something else." The ships remained a perfect, unblinking formation, no shifting in their trajectories, no sign of movement beyond what was necessary to maintain their eerie, synchronous alignment. There was a beauty to it that made the atmosphere around them feel alive, unnerving in its stillness. Vortalem's hand shot up to the control panel, fingers flying across the keys, calling up every possible system to detect and identify this unknown fleet. He felt the sharp bite of anxiety dig into his chest, the calm slipping from his grip. He could not allow himself to falter. He had faced greater challenges, outwitted superior forces, but this was something beyond his experience. The laser plasma displays buzzed erratically, data flowing at a rate that overwhelmed the systems. But none of it made sense. The fleet's position didn't match any known galactic coordinates. There was no trace of their entry, no signal, no warning. "Admiral," came the voice of Commander Thune, his tone unusually tight. "We've lost all signal integrity. Power grids are fluctuating across the fleet. Shield systems are spiking. Fix it," Vortalem barked. But even as he spoke, his mind was elsewhere, drawn to the screen that seemed to pulse with an energy that didn't belong. The ships weren't attacking. They weren't firing weapons. But their presence alone seemed to warp everything around them, distorting the space between. Every system the Coalition relied on for power, for defense, for coordination, was failing. Vortalem didn't feel anger. He didn't feel fear. He felt something else, a creeping realization that he couldn't name. These ships were not here to fight. They were here to dismantle everything the Coalition had built, piece by piece. He slammed his fist down on the console. "Deploy countermeasures. Full fleet status." Nothing. The usual protocols didn't react. It was as though the ships, these human ships, had manipulated the very fabric of space. His mind raced. He needed to regain control. But the systems were no longer under his command. The displays flickered, showing his fleet's ships drifting, their movements sluggish, their energy output dropping like stones sinking into a pond. Far below, in the council chambers of the Harathi, The elders watched with wide eyes as the image of the human fleet flickered on a small projection unit in front of them. The air was thick with uncertainty, the ground beneath them trembling as if in tune with the ominous presence in the skies. Counselor Malson, who had once felt the weight of their hopelessness, now felt a quiet stirring in his chest. It was a feeling he had long ago abandoned, the stirring of belief. The old stories, the myths of the lost warborn, came rushing back into his mind. This, this was the moment they had all feared yet longed for. The obelisk, the signal, it was all real. Humanity was no myth. They had returned. A deep, breathless silence settled over the council. The air felt heavy, saturated with anticipation. One of the elder scholars, his voice strained, whispered, "What now?" Malson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he stared at the human fleet, their ships still, almost as if they were waiting. Waiting for something, or someone. His fingers clenched as a single thought passed through his mind. The return of the lost warborn means something far greater than we understand. Vortilim's fury finally broke the silence. His face was flushed with anger as he barked orders across the bridge, trying to force the systems back online. But it was futile. The human ships were doing something to the space around them, a quiet, imperceptible shifting that sent a ripple through the Coalition's technological systems. He was being stripped of his power, not through physical weapons, but through a method of control that no one in his fleet could comprehend. "Admiral, we cannot fight them," Commander Thun said, his voice hoarse with disbelief. "Whatever they're doing, it's rewriting reality around us. We are helpless." The realization was a bitter pill for Vortilim to swallow. He clenched his fists. They hadn't fired a single shot. They hadn't even moved. And yet his entire fleet was losing control. Every system he had trusted, his sensors, his comms, his weapons, was useless. The tables had turned, and he had no idea how to fight this. He stood motionless, staring out into the endless void as the human fleet moved, not with speed or fury, but with a chilling, deliberate slowness. They were not invading. They were intervening. The image of the human ships, floating like ghosts in the darkness of space, remained burned in the minds of both the Harathi and the Coalition. The battle that had seemed inevitable now seemed foolish. No longer was the question one of power, it was a question of balance. And humanity, the long-forgotten force of nature, had returned to set the scales right. The once proud Coalition fleet, a force so confident in its dominance, now seemed a fragile structure, crumbling in the face of an unseen, unfathomable power. Admiral Vortilim's eyes darted across the laser plasma displays, but all he saw were dead icons, flickering, struggling for relevance in the growing chaos. Each ship, once a beacon of military superiority, was now faltering, its systems malfunctioning, its communications shattered, and its ability to fight slipping away like sand through fingers. "Why aren't we engaging?" Vortalim's voice was a sharp rasp, filled with a frustration that had no outlet. He stood at the center of his command center, watching as the familiar comfort of control slipped from his grasp. The enemy fleet hadn't fired a single shot, yet his own was unraveling. Power surges, jumbled messages, systems failing to calibrate. "Commander Thun, report," he barked, his posture rigid as his hands tightened around the rail. "We've lost contact with nearly half the fleet, sir," came the response, the commander's tone tinged with disbelief. I don't know how to describe it. Our systems are locking us out. Communications are static. There's no trace of incoming attacks, no fire, no weapons. We're blind, sir." "Damn it," Vortilim shouted, slamming his fist against the console. His mind scrambled for answers, but none made sense. How could it be? His enemies weren't attacking. They were simply present. And that presence, more than anything else, was destroying his command. The screens flickered again, and another fleet icon disappeared, swallowed into the ether. This wasn't an isolated incident, it was happening to them all. A wave of panic spread among the crew as the once orderly formation now broke into chaotic fragments. Ships drifted, their movements jerky and disjointed, each vessel helpless, disconnected from the whole. Admiral, the gravitational fields, they're shifting. Thune's voice broke through the tension. We can't stabilize our position. The systems, they're not reacting the way they should. They're, they're reconfiguring the battlefield around us. Vortalim's heart skipped a beat. What do you mean, reconfiguring? It's like they're not even attacking us. More like they're altering the way our ships function in space. Like the physics themselves are being twisted. The engine cores are responding at random. Some are operating in reverse, others are in a free fall. The truth hit him like a slap in the face. The humans weren't attacking. They were rewriting the rules. Slowly, imperceptibly, their ships were not just maneuvering through space. They were manipulating the very laws that governed it. And in doing so, they were stripping away every advantage the coalition fleet had built over centuries of dominance. Get me a direct line to every ship still in range, Vortalim ordered, his voice growing more controlled despite the panic tightening in his chest. He needed answers. He needed to restore command. But before he could issue another command, his eyes flicked to the viewport. Through the reinforced glass, the human fleet shifted again, without a single move, without a single weapon fired. They merely existed, their presence suffocating the very air around them. The formation had expanded, shifting into patterns that seemed too complex, too structured to be natural. It was as though they were rewriting the fabric of reality, altering space itself. Vortalim stared at the screen, transfixed. For the first time in his long career, a creeping sense of dread settled in his chest. These weren't invaders. These were architects. They didn't need weapons because they had something far more potent: control. We need to retreat, Vortalim muttered, almost to himself. Sir? Thune asked, his voice small in the shadow of the impending disaster. We've lost, Vortalim said, his voice cold, the weight of inevitability pressing down on him. We've been outmaneuvered, outclassed. The human fleet's influence expanded, the ships now positioning themselves with terrifying synchronicity, as though they were one single organism rather than a fleet of individual vessels. Their movements were smooth, deliberate, a dance in space that seemed both elegant and destructive. Inside the command room, a heavy silence fell. The hum of the Atanax's systems was replaced by an eerie quiet. It was as if the ship itself had fallen silent, waiting, anticipating the inevitable. The crew's expressions were a mixture of awe and horror, their eyes glued to the monitors that now displayed empty spaces, where once there had been life, where once there had been hope. Initiate retreat protocols, Vortalim said, the finality in his voice cutting through the tension. Prepare for the worst. But even as the order left his lips, he knew it was too late. The humans hadn't needed to destroy the coalition. They had dismantled it from within. Systems failed one by one, and the fleet, once the pinnacle of military power, now drifted like debris in the wake of something far greater. The Harathi, who had long suffered under the boot of the coalition, watched in disbelief as their enemies fell apart before their very eyes. A sense of awe washed over them, mixed with the unspoken realization that this wasn't just a battle, it was a reckoning. They had once been told the humans were gone, wiped out by the great forces of the galaxy. But in this moment, they saw the truth. The humans hadn't disappeared. They had only been waiting. Malson, standing beside the council, observed the unfolding scene. His heart was heavy, but in that wait, he found a strange sense of hope. For the first time, the Harathi saw their ancient enemies falter. The coalition's might was no match for the humans' intervention. With every flicker of the plasma displays, the truth became clearer. Power wasn't just in firepower, in the sharpness of weapons, or the might of fleets. It was in understanding. Understanding space, understanding time, and most of all, understanding the balance of the galaxy. The human fleet had done what no one else could. They had reshaped the battlefield not with force, but with intellect. The coalition's downfall wasn't marked by the destruction of its ships, but by the unraveling of its confidence. They had been stripped of their arrogance, left helpless, at the mercy of the human force they had long dismissed as a myth. Victory doesn't come through domination, Malson murmured, his voice steady as he watched the final remnants of the coalition fleet vanish into the vastness of space. It comes through understanding. And for the first time in centuries, we understand. The once proud Harathi stood in silence, their battered forms casting long shadows across the scorched earth of Salarath. The remains of the Coalition's once great fleet drifted lifelessly in orbit above, a testament to their might undone by something no one could have predicted. Not a weapon, not an army, but the quiet, unseen hand of humanity. In the heart of the ruins, the Elder Council gathered once again, their eyes heavy with the weight of the lesson they had just learned. The air was thick with dust and the silence of a world both broken and awakening. Gone were the sounds of war, replaced by the hum of thought, the churn of minds grappling with a new understanding. Humanity's intervention had not come in the form of fiery missiles or bombastic weaponry. It had come in the form of sheer balance. Counselor Derek Malson stood at the edge of the council's makeshift table, his gaze lingering on the distant horizon, where the first rays of dawn barely pierced the dark clouds still hanging over the ruins. The battle had ended, but its true meaning had only just begun to sink in. "Do you believe this was our fate?" asked Elder Reth, his voice raspy, carrying the weight of centuries of wisdom. His bark-textured hands trembled slightly as they rested on the table before him. Malson's response came slowly, as if the question itself needed time to take root in his heart. "Not fate," he said, his voice calm yet heavy with realization. "I believe we were meant to see it, this moment, this change. Humanity's return wasn't a choice, it was inevitable." The elder's brow furrowed. "But why? Why did they not destroy us? Why not conquer us as so many others before them have?" Malson exhaled deeply, his thoughts swirling in the wake of the incredible display of human power they had just witnessed. "Because they never came to conquer us. They came to restore what had been lost, a balance that the galaxy has been slowly losing for eons." The council members exchanged wary glances, uncertain of this new perspective. The destruction they had witnessed had felt like something final, like an end. But now Malson was suggesting it was just the beginning of something greater. "Balance," muttered Elder Koval, the sharp angles of his face tightening in contemplation. "Balance. How did they manage such power without firing a single shot?" Malson looked out toward the distant horizon, where the first flickers of light began to filter through the smoke-filled sky. He watched the wreckage of the Coalition fleet, once a powerful symbol of control, now drifting lifeless in the stars, no longer threatening. They had been undone by something so subtle, so precise, that even their advanced technology had no defense against it. "It wasn't their technology that defeated the Coalition," Malson continued, his voice steady. "It was their understanding, their ability to manipulate the very fabric of space itself. They didn't need to destroy their enemies. They simply made it impossible for them to function, impossible for them to continue." The room fell quiet again as the full weight of his words settled over the council. To the Harathi, who had always believed in the strength of force, the lesson was profound. For the first time, they were forced to reconsider their understanding of power. "They were not God," Elder Thorum whispered, his voice reverent. "But they were something beyond us. We thought we controlled everything, the galaxy, our enemies, the flow of time. But they controlled the very forces we thought we had mastered." Malson nodded. "Yes, they did not conquer us with strength, nor did they come to rule. They came to remind us that true power is not in control, it is in the equilibrium. They showed us that balance, once disrupted, must be restored. If we had learned that lesson earlier, perhaps this war would not have happened at all." "But what does this mean for us?" Elder Zorn asked, his skeletal features flickering with doubt. "Where do we go from here, after everything we've been through, after the destruction, the loss? How do we rebuild, knowing what we now know?" Malson's eyes softened. He stepped away from the table and looked out at the vast horizon, his thoughts trailing back to the ancient prophecy that had guided the Harathi for generations. "The prophecy spoke of a time when freedom would be dead," he murmured, "when there would be no hope left, and a force would rise to restore balance. That time has come, and humanity has shown us that their role was not to conquer, but to remind us of our place in the universe." Elder Caval's voice trembled with a mix of awe and fear. "Do you mean to say they will leave? That their work is done?" Malson turned back to face them, his face a study of resolve. I don't know, but their absence for 4,000 years has shaped this galaxy in ways we never imagined. Perhaps they left because they knew we would have to face this moment, to realize for ourselves what true power is. The council fell silent once more, each member lost in their own thoughts, reflecting on the galaxy that had been shaped by the absence of the humans. For millennia, they had been forgotten, their presence only a faint echo in the myths of ancient races. But now the Harathi understood that the true power of humanity lay not in their dominance, but in their ability to intervene only when the galaxy was teetering on the edge of collapse. We've been given a gift, Malson said finally, his voice quiet but filled with conviction. A gift of understanding. It is time for us to rebuild, not with the same arrogance we once had, but with humility. We must learn to live in balance, not just with our enemies, but with the very universe itself. He paused, the enormity of the task weighing on him. The humans have shown us the path. Now it is up to us to follow it. As the first rays of sunlight pierced the smoke-filled skies above, the Harathi Council stood in quiet reflection. Their world had been ravaged, but in the silence of the destruction, they had found clarity. The galaxy was not governed by force, but by the delicate dance of balance. And for the first time in centuries, the Harathi knew what their future held. Not war, not conquest, but understanding. And as the remnants of the coalition fleet drifted into the endless void, they knew that humanity would always be watching, waiting for the next time the balance would be disrupted. The dust of Salarath had settled, but its inhabitants remained, still broken, yet undeniably awakened. The once glorious city lay in ruins, now inhabited only by the echoes of its past and the whispers of a new understanding. The coalition, a massive force that had loomed like a predator in the galaxy, was now a shadow of its former self, scattered in the void. And above all, humanity, silent, invisible, and profound, was gone, leaving the galaxy in the grip of something far older and far more powerful than any weapon or fleet. In the council chambers, the Harathi elders gathered once more. The room was quieter now, the tension in the air replaced with something else, something less defined, but no less heavy. Councillor Malson sat at the head of the table, his mind still grappling with the events that had unfolded. For days he had watched the stars, as if searching for some sign that would make sense of it all. He had seen the human fleet disappear, without a word, without a flash. They had left no trace but a shift in the cosmic balance, a shift that could never be undone. Elder Koval's voice broke the silence. Do you think they will ever return? Malson's gaze was distant, his voice steady. No, he said quietly. They were never meant to stay. They came to restore balance, not to rule. The words hung in the air like the final note of a long-forgotten song, resonating through the quiet chambers of the council. They had come to realize in the harshest way possible that their understanding of power had been shallow, that their assumptions about the universe and their place within it were wrong. The humans had shown them that true power was not about domination or control. It was about understanding the delicate balance of the cosmos. Their return was inevitable, Malson continued, his voice softer now, as if speaking to himself. For centuries, we lived without realizing what we had lost. The myth of the lost warborn, the ancient ones, it's all true, and now we know the price of imbalance. Elder Reth, who had once clung to old notions of strength and domination, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. But why did they leave us in this state? Why not stay? Help us rebuild. Guide us. Malson turned to meet Reth's questioning gaze. To intervene is one thing, he said slowly, but to become part of the cycle again, that would be to upset the balance once more. They have shown us that we must rebuild on our own, with the wisdom of what they've taught us. There was a long pause as the council members absorbed his words, their minds working to digest the enormity of what had transpired. The destruction had been violent, chaotic, but in the end, it had not been the force of weapons that had brought the coalition to its knees. It had been humanity's quiet intervention, their ability to restore order without a single shot fired. How do we rebuild? Elder Zoran asked, the edges of his voice trembling. How do we live in a galaxy where the rules have changed, where we are not the ones in control? Malson closed his eyes for a moment, the weight of the question pressing on him. We rebuild by acknowledging the truth we've been avoiding for so long. We must learn to live in balance, not just with one another, but with the universe itself. For too long, we've sought to dominate, to control, to impose our will on the galaxy. But the humans have shown us that true strength lies in understanding when to act, when to hold back, and when to let things unfold. The room was still, each elder lost in their own thoughts. The human fleet was gone, but their legacy remained, a force not of conquest, but of restraint. A reminder that power, when left unchecked, destroys, but power, when guided by wisdom, can restore. We have been given a gift, Malson said, his voice gaining strength, a gift of understanding. We must now use this gift to guide us, to ensure that we never forget what we've learned. Humanity did not come to save us. They came to remind us of something far more important, the cosmic law, the law of balance. Elder Caval spoke again, his voice tinged with awe. They were never gods, were they? Not conquerors, not saviors, just agents of something greater than all of us. Malson nodded, his eyes reflecting the stars outside. They are not gods. They do not seek worship, nor do they need it. They are simply the ones who remind us of our place. The galaxy is vast and it moves in ways we cannot always understand. But the humans, humanity, have shown us that there is a purpose to it all, a greater purpose. The council was quiet once more, the weight of Malson's words settling over them like a blanket. They were not gods, they were not conquerors, and they were not saviors. They were agents of cosmic order, bound by a duty to preserve balance and to step in only when that balance was on the brink of destruction. As the council members stood, their minds still reeling from the knowledge they had gained, Malson lingered behind. He stepped to the large windows of the council chamber, looking out at the wreckage of Salarath. The ruins were silent now, but they were not empty. They were filled with potential. The potential to rebuild, to grow, to learn from the mistakes of the past and to forge a future based not on domination, but on understanding. In the distance, the stars twinkled, distant and cold, yet full of life. And Malson knew, deep within his soul, that the galaxy would continue to turn, that the balance would remain, and that humanity would always be there, watching, waiting, ready to step in when the scales tipped too far. The Herathi had learned their lesson. The galaxy had been reminded of its own laws. And in that reflection, there was peace. As the last rays of the sun began to fade over the horizon, Malson whispered to himself, "We are not alone, and we never will be." The sun had finally dipped below the horizon of Salarath, casting the ruined city in shades of blue and orange. The once gleaming towers of crystal were now nothing more than jagged reminders of a civilization's pride and its fall. The echoes of destruction had faded, but the realization of something deeper, the quiet return of balance, still reverberated through the minds of the surviving Herathi. In the weeks that followed the departure of humanity, their silence remained like an open question. What would come next? The Council of Herathi elders gathered once more, but this time there was no tension, no rushing whispers of panic. The weight that had hung in the air during their previous meetings was gone. Now they sat in contemplative silence. The enormity of humanity's intervention still loomed over them like a cloud that had not yet dissipated. It was never about domination, Malson murmured, his voice quieter than before. The words felt heavy but true. They came not to claim the galaxy, but to ensure its survival. The Elder Council turned their attention to him, each face drawn in deep reflection. Koval, who had once railed against the very idea of submission, now seemed to be trying to untangle a deeper meaning from the silence left in humanity's wake. They didn't fight us, or conquer us, or even attempt to destroy us. They didn't demand anything from us. Instead, they redefined the terms of the battle, reshaped the very structure of the conflict. The universe itself seemed to bend at their will. Malson nodded slowly. The humans were not conquerors. Their role was not to win or lose, but to remind us of something fundamental, the law of cosmic balance. The room was still, the words settled like dust on the floor, their significance creeping in like the twilight outside the window. They all understood now in their bones what humanity had been. They were not gods. They were not saviors. They were the harbingers of a universal law that did not need to be enforced with weapons or armies. Instead, it existed as a principle, a quiet force in the background, steering the galaxy away from ruin. Outside, the stars blinked silently in the deep blackness. Far from the wreckage of Salarath, in the distant reaches of the galaxy, other races were beginning to stir. Whispers of the humans' return and their swift departure traveled like shock waves through the galactic networks. The remnants of the coalition, too, were slowly piecing together their failure, the aftershocks of their defeat still echoing in the corridors of their fallen fleets. Yet the galaxy had not yet fully come to terms with the fact that humanity was not an empire to be overthrown. They were not a force to be reckoned with through battle, but through understanding, through a power that lay in restraint, in knowing when to step in and when to withdraw. Counselor Reth's voice, once filled with the harsh edge of pride and power, now carried a tremor of humility. We are not the only ones who must change, are we? The galaxy, everyone in it, must learn to live according to a different law now. A law that transcends our thirst for power, a law that asks us to recognize when we've crossed a line, when we've tipped the balance too far. Malson sat back, the weight of Reth's words settling on his shoulders like a mantle he was just now starting to understand. The humans didn't just save us from destruction. They saved the galaxy from itself. They showed us that power is not something to be wielded without understanding. They used their strength to ensure we didn't destroy the very things that made us who we are, our capacity for growth, for learning, for balance. The Elder Council began to exchange quiet glances, the weight of the realization dawning on each of them in turn. "And they left," Kova whispered, half in awe, half in sorrow. "They left without a word, without a victory cry. They didn't need to say anything, because the galaxy will remember. Their presence will be felt long after they are gone." Another elder, Malin, raised his voice, hesitant but clear. "What does this mean for us? For the future of the Harathi? For the future of all races?" His words were quiet, uncertain, but there was a note of determination, a flicker of understanding that had not been present before. Malson turned his gaze to the window, his thoughts drifting toward the stars. "It means that we have been given a choice to rebuild, but with knowledge that we are not masters of the universe. We are simply part of a greater whole. We must live in harmony with the galaxy, not try to dominate it." He paused, taking a breath, as if to let the weight of the decision settle on him before speaking again. "And we must teach others what we have learned. The next generations must carry this lesson forward. It is no longer enough to fight for survival or dominance. We must fight for balance, for understanding." Reth looked down, the last vestiges of his former arrogance falling away. "Balance," he said, tasting the word as if it were new to him. "It's not something we can control. It's something we must protect." The council remained in silence for a long while. Outside, the winds had picked up, the streets of Salurath quiet beneath a sky filled with stars. For the first time, the galaxy felt vast, and yet incredibly close, connected by something deeper than technology or power. It was connected by a shared purpose, a shared responsibility. The realization that, for all their might, no species could truly stand alone. In the aftermath, Malson watched the sky, his mind no longer searching for answers, but finding peace in the knowledge that humanity had left the galaxy better than it had found it. Not through force, not through domination, but through a quiet intervention that reminded everyone of their place in the grand order of things. The humans had shown them the way, and now it was their turn to walk that path. With that, the stars above Salurath shone brighter, as if in silent acknowledgement. And for the first time, the galaxy was not afraid. The last remnants of the Coalition fleet drifted through the cold expanse of space, battered and broken, their once proud ships limping towards the edges of the galaxy. Their retreat was not just an escape, it was the sound of a once glorious empire recognizing its own weakness. The pursuit of dominance, once their singular purpose, had crumbled under the quiet, unyielding force of humanity's intervention. In the aftermath, the galaxy was still. No more blasts of energy echoed across the void. No more desperate commands shouted through comms channels. The war was over, but what had been won? And what was left to rebuild? The survivors of the Herathi Council stood at the edge of their crumbling world, staring at the sky. For the first time in centuries, they felt the weight of the universe pressed down upon them, not as conquerors, but as stewards of its fragile balance. Humanity had taught them an unexpected lesson. Not through violence, not through conquest, but through the silent imposition of equilibrium. I never thought this day would come, Koval said, his voice low and heavy, when we would stand and watch the stars with no war in our hearts. No one ever told us that strength could look like this. Malsen's gaze remained fixed on the empty blackness of space. Strength, he murmured, isn't about overpowering others. It never was. True strength is knowing when to act and when to remain still. The silent truth of his words settled among the council like a shroud. The galaxies had turned in chaos for millennia, constantly shifting in the wake of wars, empires rising and falling, races expanding and collapsing under their own weight. But in the wake of humanity's intervention, nothing had been shattered. Everything had simply shifted. The humans, Malsen continued, didn't conquer us. They didn't tear us down. They forced us to confront a deeper truth, that no one race can claim the galaxy for themselves. We were but a piece in a much grander tapestry. He paused, his fingers tracing the surface of a datapad. They didn't fight to win. They fought to preserve something we had forgotten. Balance. Reth stepped forward, his usual arrogance replaced by something quieter, something more introspective. And now we are left to rebuild, to make sure that we don't forget what we have learned. Humanity's return was not a victory for them. It was a victory for all of us, for the galaxy itself. The stars above them twinkled with the quiet intensity of an eternal silence, a silence that had been absent for too long. The coalition, though broken, had not been the only one humbled. The very idea of cosmic order had been reset, and the galaxy, left in its wake, now had to reconcile with the lessons humanity had imparted, lessons that would ripple across civilizations for centuries to come. As the council members turned back to face each other, the silence hung like a weight. No one dared to break it, for they all understood now that words had lost their place. What was left to say when the truth had already been laid bare? I understand now, Malsen said, his voice quiet but resolute. Humanity's message wasn't a warning. It was a reminder that the universe is not ours to control. It's ours to protect. His gaze turned to the distant horizon, where the human fleet had once appeared and just as quickly disappeared. They came to restore order, not to build an empire. The weight of those words hung heavily in the air. The legacy of humanity was not one of conquest or destruction, but one of restraint and balance. They had not come as rulers. They had come as guardians. Do you think they will return? Koval asked, his voice tinged with a sense of hope he hadn't felt in years. Malsen shook his head slowly. They've already done what they came to do. The galaxy has changed. It will never be the same again. And what of us? Reth asked, his gaze hardening with a mixture of curiosity and resolve. How do we move forward from here? What path do we take now that humanity has left us with this burden? Malsen looked to the stars once more, his eyes reflecting the quiet wisdom that had only now begun to surface within him. We build something that lasts, not out of force or power, but out of understanding. We learn to live within the balance that they've shown us. The council stood together in silence, each of them reflecting on the true magnitude of what had occurred. The galaxy had faced its tipping point, and humanity's intervention had been the fulcrum, gently but undeniably returning the balance to its rightful place. And with that realization, a final truth emerged. Humanity had not been the force of destruction, nor had they been a fleeting hope. They were, and would always be, the guardians of a fragile, shifting cosmos. Not conquerors, not kings, but keepers of the cosmic balance. As the council dispersed, the stars above Salarath burned bright with the knowledge that humanity's presence had left a mark far deeper than any weapon or fleet could ever have. The legacy of humanity would be one of quiet reflection and ever-present equilibrium, a legacy that would reverberate through the fabric of the galaxy for eons to come. For now there was peace, but peace, like all things in the galaxy, was fragile. And the next tipping point would come, as it always had, when the balance was once again threatened. But when that time came, the galaxy would remember what had happened. It would remember the humans who had returned, not to rule, but to restore. The message had been sent, and it would endure long after the stars had faded. Humanity's legacy was not a conquest, it was a warning, a reminder that the universe, in all its vastness, could only survive if its balance was maintained. And with that, the galaxy waited. For nothing lasts forever. But for now, it was enough.